My name is Owen, and I want to tell you my story. I'm not telling you this for sympathy, and I'm not telling you this for attention. I'm telling you this because for 6 long months, I was a ghost in my own life, a stranger in my own home, and a prisoner in my own mind. And if you're out there, and you feel that same creeping chill of self-doubt, that same quiet whisper that tells you you're the one who's broken, I need you to listen. I need you to hear what they did to me, so you can recognize it if it ever happens to you. It starts small. It always starts small. For the last 6 months, my wife Claire had been telling me I was losing my mind. It wasn't an accusation, not at first. It was a gentle concern, a soft-spoken worry that was 1,000 times more insidious. She claimed I'd been misplacing things: my wallet, my keys, the TV remote. Trivial things that became emblems of my supposed decay. She claimed I was forgetting entire conversations. We'd agree to have dinner with friends, and I'd have no memory of it, leaving me to apologize profusely, my face burning with a shame I didn't understand. She said I was hearing noises that weren't there, a faint tapping in the walls at night, a muffled voice from the basement. I'd sit up in bed, my heart pounding, and she'd just put a cool hand on my arm and say, "It's nothing, honey. The house is just settling. Go back to sleep." And the worst part, I believed her. How could I not? This was Claire, my wife of 12 years, the mother of my 2 beautiful children, Leo and Maya. She was my rock, my partner. Her concern was so convincing, her pity so genuine, that it felt more real than my own perceptions. Soon it wasn't just her. Our friends started to notice. They'd exchange those quick, worried glances when I'd lose the thread of a story. My own brother David called me, his voice strained. "Claire's really worried, Owen. She says you're not yourself. Are you sleeping okay? Are you okay?" The world I knew, the solid ground of my own sanity, was turning to quicksand beneath my feet. I started to believe the narrative. I started to see myself through their eyes, a man coming undone, a loving father who was becoming a potential danger to his own children. The thought was a shard of ice in my gut. What if I forgot to turn off the stove? What if I left the door unlocked? What if one of the noises I heard was one of my kids crying for help, and I dismissed it as another phantom? The fear was an acid, eating away at me day and night. I was about to do the unthinkable. I was about to check myself into a clinic, to hand myself over to professionals because I was convinced I was a danger to the people I loved most. I had the brochure on my nightstand. The decision was made. I was surrendering. Then came the socket wrench. It was a Saturday morning. I was trying to fix a loose leg on my son's bicycle, a simple 10-minute job. I went to the garage, to my large, meticulously organized tool chest, a place that had always been my sanctuary. The 10mm socket wrench was gone. I knew exactly where it was supposed to be, in the 3rd drawer, 2nd slot from the left. It wasn't there. I felt that familiar, hot flush of panic and frustration. Another thing lost, another failure. Claire was right. I was a mess. I spent 20 minutes searching, my frustration mounting into a quiet, desperate rage at my own failing mind. I tore through drawers, emptied boxes, my carefully maintained order dissolving into chaos. Finally, in a fit of desperation, I remembered an old rusty toolbox my dad had given me years ago, shoved under a dusty tarp in the far corner of the garage. I rarely used it. It was more of a keepsake. I dragged it out, the metal hinges groaning in protest. I figured maybe, just maybe, I'd put the wrench in there during a moment of profound forgetfulness. I lifted the heavy lid, the smell of old oil and metal filling the air. There was no wrench, but there was something else. Tucked into a side pocket, folded into a neat small square, was a piece of paper, a receipt. My heart didn't stop. It didn't pound. It just went cold. The name on the top wasn't a hardware store or a parts supplier. It was a company I'd never heard of. Aura Acoustics and Containment. Below the name was a description of services rendered. My eyes scanned the words, but my brain refused to process them at first. Consultation, installation, and materials for full-spectrum acoustic dampening and professional soundproofing. The location of the job was listed as our address, and the specific room, basement storage unit west wall. The total cost was staggering, well over $10,000. The date on the receipt was 4 months ago. I stood there, in the dusty silence of my garage, the receipt trembling in my hand. We don't have a music room. We don't have a home theater. The basement storage room was just that, a place for Christmas decorations and old furniture, kept behind a heavy dead-bolted door because, as Claire had once said, she was worried about the kids getting into the old paint cans. I'd never had a reason to go in there. The key was on Claire's key ring, a key I'd never once thought to ask for, but now I had a very, very good reason to open that door. The last 6 months of my life, a fog of confusion and fear, suddenly snapped into sharp, horrifying focus. The misplaced items, the forgotten conversations, the noises that weren't there. It wasn't my mind that was broken, it was my marriage, and that soundproofed room held the proof. My descent into madness hadn't been a fall, I was pushed. The drive was a blur. I don't remember the route I took, the turns I made, or the cars I passed. I just remember the feeling of the steering wheel in my hands, a solid, real thing in a world that had just liquefied around me. The receipt was on the passenger seat, a flimsy piece of paper that felt heavier than an anchor. It was the evidence of a crime so personal, so deeply violating, that I had no name for it yet. Gaslighting was too simple a word. This was soul theft. This was the meticulous, patient, and loving destruction of a man. I ended up at a small, secluded park, overlooking a murky lake, a place Claire and I had gone on one of our first dates. The irony was so bitter, it felt like I'd swallowed poison. I sat in the car, engine off, and just stared at the gray water. My mind was a maelstrom. Every memory, from the past 6 months, every instance of her gentle concern, was replaying in my head. But now the film was different. The color was gone, replaced by a cold, clinical black and white. I saw the calculation in her eyes, the subtle tension in her smile, the practiced pity in her voice. I remembered the dinner party. It was with our friends Marcus and Sarah. Claire had told me she'd confirmed with them for Friday night. I'd spent the day looking forward to it, a small island of normalcy in my increasingly confusing life. When Friday came, I got ready. Put on a nice shirt. Claire came into the bedroom, a look of profound sadness on her face. "Owen, honey, what are you doing?" she'd asked, her voice a soft caress. I told her I was getting ready for dinner. She put her hands on my shoulders, her touch feeling less like an embrace and more like a restraint. "That was last night, sweetie," she said, her brow furrowed with worry. "Don't you remember? We went. You had the steak. You told that story about your college roommate." I stared at her, my mind a complete blank. I had no memory of it. None. Marcus called later that evening, and Claire put him on speaker. "Hey buddy, sorry you weren't feeling well last night," he'd said. "Claire told us you were a bit under the weather. We missed you." The lie was layered, collaborative. I'd hung up the phone and felt a wave of dizziness, a genuine fear that my brain was leaking memories like a sieve. I apologized to Claire, over and over, for my state, for worrying her. She had just hugged me and said, "It's okay, we'll get through this. I'm here for you." Today, sitting by that lake, the memory made me physically sick. I had to open the car door and dry heave onto the gravel, the taste of bile in my mouth. She had orchestrated it all. The call to them beforehand to cancel, the fake story about me being sick, the follow-up call from Marcus that was meant to cement the lie in my fractured mind. They weren't just our friends, they were her accomplices, willing or not. Then the noises. Oh God, the noises. It was the most brilliant, most cruel part of her plan. They were never loud enough to be definitive. A faint, rhythmic thumping that sounded like it was coming from below the living room floor. I'd pause the TV, my head cocked. "Did you hear that?" I'd ask. Claire would look up from her book, her expression placid. "Hear what, Owen? It's an old house. It makes noises." Sometimes it was a whisper, a sibilant hiss so quiet, I thought it might be my own breathing. But it always came when I was alone in a room, late at night. I started sleeping with earplugs, but the phantom sounds, as I'd come to call them, seemed to bypass my ears and vibrate directly in my skull. I was so convinced, I'd even called a pest control company, certain we had rats in the walls. The technician spent 2 hours inspecting the house and found nothing. He'd given me a pitying look as he left, the kind of look you give a man who is hearing things. Claire had paid him for his time, and then held my hand, telling me it was okay, that we'd figure out what was happening to me. The receipt on my passenger seat told me exactly what was happening. It wasn't rats in the walls. It was a speaker, a $10,000, professionally installed speaker, placed with surgical precision to deliver whispers of insanity directly to me, my brother. That was the cut that went deepest. I replayed my last conversation with David. He'd always been my biggest supporter, my best friend before I even knew what one was. We'd survived our parents' messy divorce together, leaning on each other. But on that phone call he was a stranger. "Claire is thinking about getting power of attorney," he'd said, his voice hesitant, cautious. "Just for your finances, man. For a little while." "She said you paid the same utility bill 3 times last month and forgot to pay the mortgage. She's scared you're going to run the family into the ground." I had no defense. I vaguely remembered a confusing online banking session, the numbers swimming on the screen. It felt plausible. It felt real. Now, I saw it for what it was. Claire, sitting at the same computer hours later, making 2 more payments to manufacture evidence, forgetting the mortgage. She handled that bill. She had for years. It was her responsibility. She hadn't forgotten. She had deliberately not paid it, waiting for the late notice to arrive. Another nail in the coffin of my competence. And why? Why this elaborate, monstrous charade? The answer came to me with the force of a physical blow, knocking the wind out of me. My father, before he passed away 2 years ago, he'd set up a substantial trust fund for me and David. He was a brilliant architect, but he'd also been a shrewd investor. The money was a safety net, a legacy. But my dad, for all his brilliance, had been scarred by watching his own father decline from Alzheimer's. He'd seen how finances could be destroyed, how predators could circle, so he'd had his lawyer, a man named Mr. Peterson, insert a specific clause into the trust, a competency clause. It stated that if either of the beneficiaries were to be deemed medically or psychologically unfit to manage their own affairs by 2 independent physicians, control of their portion of the trust would be transferred to their legal spouse, or if unmarried, to the other sibling. Claire had brought it up about 5 months ago, casually, over dinner. "I was just looking over some of our old financial papers," she'd said, swirling her wine. "That trust your dad set up is so generous, but that clause in it is a little scary, isn't it? I mean, what if something happened to you? It's good to know there's a plan to make sure the kids are taken care of." I'd agreed, thinking nothing of it. It was just Claire being her usual forward-thinking self, but it wasn't foresight. It was a mission statement. She didn't want to take care of me. She wanted to replace me. She wanted my father's legacy, and the only way to get it was to have me declared insane. The sheer diabolical patience of it all was what broke me. This wasn't a crime of passion. This was a long con. Months of planning, of careful execution, of lying to my face every single day while holding my hand and telling me she loved me. The woman I had built my life with, the mother of my children, was actively, methodically, trying to erase me. I was at my lowest point, sitting there in that car, a hollowed-out shell of a man. The world was a lie. My marriage was a lie. My friendships were a lie. My own perception of myself was a lie. For a terrifying moment, the old fear crept back in. What if I was wrong? What if the receipt was a mistake, a prank, a misunderstanding? What if I was just a paranoid man, creating a grand conspiracy to avoid the simple, terrible truth that my mind was failing? The thought was a siren's call pulling me back toward the comfortable narrative of my own madness. It was easier to believe I was sick than to believe my wife was a monster. My hand was shaking as I picked up my phone. I didn't know who to call. Not my brother, not Marcus. They were part of her web. There was only one person left who stood outside of it. One person who might still see me as Owen, not as a patient. My friend Mark. We'd been friends since high school, but life had gotten in the way. We saw each other a few times a year, for a beer or a ball game. He knew Claire, but not well. He wasn't in our inner circle. He was my last resort. My voice cracked when he answered. "Mark, it's Owen. Hey man, long time no see. Everything all right? You sound weird." And it all came out. I didn't plan to. I didn't even know where to start, but it tumbled out of me, in a torrent of frantic, half-sobbing words. The lost keys, the noises, the missed appointments, my brother's phone call, the clinic brochure,
The socket wrench, the toolbox, the receipt. I laid it all out. The whole insane, unbelievable story. I finished, breathless, my heart hammering against my ribs, fully expecting him to say, "Owen, you need to get help. Let me call Claire for you." I waited for the final nail to be hammered into my coffin. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. I could hear him breathing. Then he said, his voice low and serious, "Owen, where are you right now?" I told him, "Stay there. Don't go home. Don't call her. Don't call her. Don't do anything. I'm on my way. And listen to me," he said, his voice so firm it cut through my panic. "You're not losing your mind. That's not memory loss. That's a conspiracy. This is a takedown, and you're the target. We need a plan." His words were a defibrillator to my dying spirit. A conspiracy, a takedown. He didn't think I was crazy. He believed me. In that moment, the despair that had been choking me for months finally fractured. It didn't disappear, but a crack of light shone through. The feeling that replaced it was something I hadn't felt in a very long time. It wasn't happiness or relief. It was cold, hard resolve. She had wanted to break me. She had wanted to make me a ghost, but she had failed. The war for my mind was over, and I had, against all odds, won. Now a different kind of war was about to begin. It wasn't about revenge, until it was. Mark arrived 20 minutes later, his beat-up sedan kicking up gravel as he pulled in next to my car. He didn't get out right away. He just looked at me through the window, his expression a mixture of shock and grim determination. He got out, walked over, and opened my passenger door. He didn't say a word. He just picked up the receipt from the seat, read it once, then a second time, and let out a long, low whistle. 10 grand, he said, shaking his head. "This isn't amateur hour, Owen. This is professional grade evil." He finally looked at me, and for the first time in 6 months, I felt truly seen. Not as a patient, not as a charity case, but as a man who had been profoundly wronged. "What do I do, Mark?" I asked, my voice raw. "Do I confront her? Do I call the cops? Do I just leave?" "No," he said, handing the receipt back to me, as if it were a holy relic. "You do none of those things. If you confront her, she'll deny everything. She'll say you're paranoid, that you're hallucinating the receipt. She'll use your anger as proof of your instability. If you call the cops, what do you tell them? My wife soundproofed a room. It's not a crime. It's just weird. And if you just leave, you play right into her hand. You abandon your home, your kids, and she gets to play the victim. The poor wife whose crazy husband finally snapped and ran away. He was right. Any impulsive move would only validate the character she had created for me. I had been cast as the unhinged husband, and any deviation from the role of a placid, confused victim would be seen as a dangerous escalation.
"So I'm trapped," I said, the hope that had flared up moments before now dimming. "No," Mark said, leaning against the car. "You're not trapped. You're armed. That receipt is a weapon, but you can't use a weapon until you know the battlefield. Right now she controls everything. The narrative, the house, the information. We need to change that. We need to be smarter than her. We need to be colder than her." Mark worked in IT security for a big corporate firm. His job was to think like a thief, to anticipate threats, to find weaknesses in systems. And as he started talking, I realized he was looking at my life as a compromised network. Claire was the hacker, and she'd had administrator access for years. "First things first," he said, pulling out his phone and starting a new note. "We need to get inside that room. We need to see what's in there. You can't just break down the door. She'd hear it, and the game would be up. We need to get in, document everything, and get out without leaving a trace. The key is on her keyring," I said. "She never takes it off." "Then a key is not our entry vector," he said, a glint in his eye I hadn't seen since we were teenagers trying to bypass the school's internet filter. Deadbolts on interior doors are usually standard. Low security pins, a decent lock-picking set, and a few hours of YouTube tutorials can get you through one of those. It's a skill, you can learn it. The idea felt insane, like something out of a spy movie, but it also felt empowering. It was an action. It was a plan. "While you're learning that," he continued, "we need to turn her own surveillance back on her. She's been monitoring you, your moods, your symptoms. We need to monitor her. We need to see who she talks to, what she does when you're not around. He showed me a website on his phone, tiny, wireless cameras, smaller than a thumbnail, with long-life batteries and motion activation. We put one in the kitchen, one in the living room, and one in the hallway, aimed directly at that basement door. We need to see her go in there. We need to catch her in the act of maintaining her little theater. The final piece of the puzzle, he said, was the most important. You need a lawyer, not just any family lawyer who handles simple divorces. You need a shark, someone who specializes in high-conflict cases, financial fraud, stuff like that. You have a trust fund involved. This isn't just a breakup, it's a heist. You need an expert. We sat there for another hour, by that gray, forgotten lake, and plotted. It felt surreal, mapping out a covert operation against my own wife, in my own home. But with every step we outlined, a layer of the helpless, confused fog lifted from my mind, replaced by a sharp, icy clarity. The next few weeks were the hardest of my life. I had to go home and play the part of the broken man. I had to look into Claire's eyes, the same eyes that had watched me crumble with a cold, detached satisfaction, and pretend I was still her patient. I had to thank her for her concern. I had to nod along when she told me she'd made me a doctor's appointment. Every word was ash in my mouth. Every feigned smile was a betrayal of the rage that was now simmering inside me. It was the performance of a lifetime, and my life depended on it. During the day, while I was working from home, another of Claire's suggestions to reduce my stress, I was a student of espionage. The lock-picking kit arrived in a discreet Amazon package. I set up a workshop in the garage, using old padlocks and doorknobs I bought at the hardware store. My hands, which had been trembling with anxiety for months, became steady and precise. I spent hours practicing, feeling the subtle clicks of the pins, learning the language of the lock. Mark sourced the cameras. One afternoon, while Claire was at a yoga class, he came over. We were like two teenage boys up to no good, but the stakes were terrifyingly adult. We placed the cameras with painstaking care. The one in the kitchen was hidden in a fake smoke detector on the ceiling. The living room camera was concealed in a digital photo frame I'd found in storage. The most important one, the one aimed at the basement door, was a tiny pinhole lens hidden in the grill of a defunct air vent. We set them up to upload their motion-activated recordings to a secure, anonymous cloud server that only Mark and I could access. The day I was ready to open the door, my heart was a drum against my ribs. Claire had taken the kids to a Saturday morning street fair, a long affair that would give me a 3-hour window. The house was silent. The silence itself felt different now. It wasn't empty, it was charged with secrets. I stood before the basement storage room door, the heavy deadbolt seeming to mock me. I took a deep breath, inserted the tension wrench in the pick, and went to work. My hands were sweating, my breath catching in my throat. It took an agonizing 10 minutes, far longer than it had on the practice locks. Every creak of the old house made me jump. Finally, I felt the last pin give way with a soft, satisfying click. The lock turned. I was in. I pushed the door open into darkness. I didn't turn on the light. I used the flashlight on my phone. The room wasn't filled with Christmas decorations and old furniture. It was mostly empty. The walls were covered in thick, dark gray acoustic foam, the kind you see in recording studios. The air was dead, heavy, without a hint of an echo. My footsteps made no sound on the thick carpet that had been laid over the concrete floor. It was like stepping into a vacuum. And then I saw it. On the far wall, the one that I now realized was directly beneath our living room, was the source of my torment. It wasn't large, but it was high-tech. A directional sound projector, mounted on an adjustable bracket. Wires ran from it down to a small table, where a laptop sat, humming quietly. I walked over, my movements feeling slow and deliberate, like I was moving through water. I opened the laptop. It was unlocked. The desktop was clean, except for a single folder. The folder was labeled simply, Project Owen. My blood ran cold. I clicked it open. Inside were dozens of audio files. The names were clinical, descriptive, faint, _thumping, _loop.mp3, creaking, _floorboards, _low.wave, whispering, _male, _voice, _unintelligible, .mp3, rhythmic, _tapping, _randomized, .mp3. I put my phone next to the laptop speaker and clicked on one of them. The sound that came out was faint, a barely there, rhythmic thump. It was the sound that had haunted my nights. The sound that Claire had assured me was just the house settling. I played another. A man's voice, whispering words I couldn't make out. It was the sound I'd heard from the walls, the one that had convinced me I was hearing things. It was all here. A library of my own personal madness, curated and deployed by my wife. I didn't touch anything, I just took out my phone and started recording. I did a slow 360-degree pan of the room, showing the soundproofing, the empty space. I zoomed in on the speaker, the wires, the laptop. I opened the folder and recorded the file names. I played a few of the audio files, capturing them on video. It was my proof, my vindication, my declaration of war. After I was done, I backed out of the room, locked the deadbolt, a process that was thankfully much faster than picking it, and went back to the garage, my whole body shaking with a cocktail of rage and adrenaline. The final piece of the plan was in motion. The next day, I had an appointment. Not with the psychiatrist Claire had chosen, but with a woman named Miss Evelyn Davies, a lawyer Mark had found. Her website described her as a specialist in complex domestic litigation and asset protection. She was exactly the shark I needed. Walking into her downtown office felt like crossing a threshold into a new life. The air was calm, professional, a stark contrast to the chaos of my own home. Miss Davies was a woman in her 50s with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor that I found immensely comforting. I didn't ramble this time. I laid out the story calmly, methodically. I told her about the last 6 months, about the trust, about my brother. Then, I placed my phone on her polished mahogany desk and played the video I had taken in the soundproofed room. She watched the entire thing without a word, her expression unreadable. When it was over, she didn't look at me with pity. She looked at me with a sort of professional fury. "Mr. Miller," she said, her voice quiet but carrying the weight of steel. "What your wife has engaged in is not just grounds for divorce. This is a coordinated, premeditated campaign of psychological abuse intended to fraudulently seize control of a significant financial asset. In layman's terms, she tried to drive you crazy for money. The family court will be utterly appalled. The trustee of your father's estate will be even more so." She leaned forward. "So, here is what we are going to do. You will continue to play your part. You will be the confused, sad husband. You will let her believe she is winning. In the meantime, we will prepare. We will open a new bank account in your name only. We will draft an emergency petition for sole temporary custody of your children, citing the evidence of extreme psychological manipulation and the creation of an unsafe environment. We will file for divorce, and we will file a separate civil suit for fraud. We will not just dismantle her plan, Mr. Miller. We will salt the earth where it stood." I walked out of that office feeling 10 feet tall. The fear was gone, replaced by a cold, righteous anger. Claire had mistaken my love for weakness, my trust for stupidity. She thought she was directing a play where I was the tragic hero descending into madness. She had no idea I was rewriting the script, and in my version, she was the villain, and the final act was coming. The next 2 weeks were a masterclass in deception. I went to the initial consultation with the psychiatrist Claire had booked for me. I played the role to perfection. I spoke of the noises, the memory gaps, the pervasive fog of confusion. I saw the doctor, a kind but overworked man, jotting down notes, potential early onset dementia, auditory hallucinations, patient seems disassociated.
I knew Claire would call him for a progress report, and I gave him exactly the material she wanted to hear. I was laying the bait. Meanwhile, behind the scenes, Miss Davies's machine was working with ruthless efficiency. I opened the new bank account. Guided by a forensic accountant she'd hired, I legally and quietly transferred half of our joint savings, my half, into it. We documented every penny Claire had spent from our accounts over the past year, highlighting the $10,000 payment to Aura Acoustics and Containment. We prepared the petition for custody, complete with a sworn affidavit from me, a copy of the receipt, and a link to the video evidence I'd secured from the soundproofed room. The most damning evidence, however, came from our own surveillance. The hidden cameras, my silent, unblinking allies, started painting a picture that was even darker than I had imagined. At first it was small things. I watched footage of Claire, moments after I'd left the room, drop her concerned facade. The worried frown would vanish, replaced by a look of cold, impatient frustration. She would pace, check her phone, her mask of loving concern gone the second her audience of one had departed. Then, about a week after I'd planted the cameras, we hit the jackpot. The camera, in the kitchen, the one hidden in the smoke detector, captured the conversation that would become the cornerstone of my entire case. I was upstairs, supposedly taking a nap to clear my head. Claire was in the kitchen, making tea. She was on the phone, her back to the camera, but the audio was crystal clear. "No, David, you don't understand," she said, her voice sharp, stripped of the gentle tone she always used with my brother. "It's getting worse. He's talking about clinics now. He's finally realizing how far gone he is." There was a pause. "Of course it's for the best. Once he's committed, getting the doctors to sign off on the competency evaluation will be a formality. They'll see how detached from reality he is." Another pause, and then the words that made my blood freeze. "Look, the trust is the only way to secure the kid's future, and ours. Once I have control, we can finally stop hiding. We can buy that place by the coast. It'll all be worth it. Just be patient." Ours. She wasn't talking to my brother. I knew David's voice, his cadence, even muffled over a phone. This was someone else. And that word ours hung in the air like a poisonous spore. She wasn't just doing this for herself. She had a partner. The final brutal piece of the puzzle slid into place. It wasn't just about the money. It was about a new life, with a new man, built on the ashes of my sanity. I watched the footage 3 times, my rage so profound it became a state of absolute calm. The betrayal was so complete, so total, that it was almost sublime in its monstrosity. I sent the file to Miss Davies with a simple note. Exhibit A. The day I had chosen for my departure arrived. It was a Monday. I was scheduled to check myself into the Oakwood Meadows Wellness Clinic at 11 a.m. I came downstairs with a small overnight bag I'd packed with a few changes of clothes. Claire was waiting for me at the bottom of the stairs. She looked radiant, a picture of relieved sorrow. She thought this was her victory lap. She came to me and wrapped her arms around my neck. Her hug felt like a viper's coil. "I'm so proud of you for doing this, Owen," she whispered in my ear, her voice thick with false emotion. "This is the first step to getting you back. The kids and I will be waiting. We love you so much." I just nodded, my face a mask of weary resignation. "I love you too," I said. The words tasted like dirt. "I'll drive you," she offered. "I want to be there for you." "No," I said, pulling away gently. I think I need to do this part on my own. I need to walk in there by myself. It feels important." I saw a flicker of something in her eyes, not disappointment, but satisfaction. My desire to go alone was further proof of my isolation, my sickness. It fit her narrative perfectly. "Okay, honey. If that's what you need," she said, cupping my face in her hands. "Call me when you're settled." I walked out the front door of my own home for the last time. I got in my car and drove away, watching her wave from the porch in my rearview mirror, a perfect portrait of a devoted wife. She had no idea I wasn't driving to a mental institution. I was driving to my lawyer's office. At 10 a.m., a courier, dispatched by Miss Davies, filed our emergency custody petition with the family court. By 10:45 a.m., a judge, having reviewed the video evidence and my affidavit, signed the order granting me temporary sole custody of Leo and Maya, effective immediately. The order cited clear and convincing evidence of a campaign of extreme psychological abuse by the mother, creating an environment of imminent emotional and psychological danger to the minor children. At 11:30 a.m., I drove to my children's elementary school. I walked into the principal's office, my hands steady, my heart calm. I handed the principal, Mrs. Gable, the signed and stamped court order. She read it, her eyes widening. She looked up at me, her expression a mixture of confusion and concern. "Mr. Miller, is everything all right?" she asked. "Everything is finally going to be," I said. Leo and Maya were called to the office, their faces full of questions. I knelt down and looked them in the eyes. "Hey guys, we're going to go on a little adventure, just the three of us. We're going to stay in a new cool apartment for a little while. How does that sound?" They were hesitant, but they trusted me. They always had. They were the only two people in my life whose faith had never wavered, even when I was at my worst. Getting them out of that house away from her was the only thing that mattered. We walked out of that school, hand in hand, and we didn't look back. I took them to a 2-bedroom apartment I had rented a week prior, in a quiet complex across town. It was already furnished, the fridge stocked with their favorite foods. I had bought them new toys, new books, a new video game console. I wanted it to feel like a vacation, not an escape. For the first few hours they were just excited. A new place, a new adventure with Dad. The deeper questions would come later, and I would be ready to answer them as honestly as I could. Back at the house, Claire's perfect day was beginning to sour. I knew her routine. She'd have given me an hour or two to settle in at the clinic before she started her victory tour. The first call would be to her partner in crime, telling him the eagle had landed. Then my brother David, to share the sad but hopeful news. Then our friends, but her calls would have gone unanswered. I had turned my phone off. At around 1 p.m., her patience would have worn thin. She would have called the Oakwood Meadows Wellness Clinic. The polite receptionist would have informed her, "I'm sorry ma'am, but we have no patient by the name of Owen Miller registered here. In fact, we have no record of him at all." The first seed of panic. She would have called my phone again and again, straight to voicemail. She would have called Mark, who had his instructions. "Haven't heard from him, Claire. I'm sure he's fine, he just needs some space," he'd say, his voice neutral.
The real gut-wrenching terror would have set in around 3:30 p.m. when the kids didn't get off the school bus. After a few frantic minutes, she would have called the school, and the secretary, following protocol, would have delivered the devastatingly simple, soul-crushing blow. "Oh yes, Mrs. Miller. Leo and Maya were picked up by their father at 11:30 this morning." He presented a court order. The world she had built, the elaborate stage for my destruction, had just collapsed on top of her. The pawn she thought she'd checkmated had just swept the entire board clean. I imagined her in that silent house, the house she'd tried to steal, a house that was now just a box full of her own lies. She had no idea where I was. She had no idea where the kids were. She had lost control, and her panic was just beginning. The first barrage came via text message, a flurry of frantic misspelled demands. "Where are you? Where are the kids? Answer me now." Followed by, "The school said you took them. What have you done, Owen?" Then the threats began. "If you don't bring them back, I am calling the police and reporting them kidnapped. You are insane." I sat on the couch in my new peaceful apartment, watching my children build a pillow fort in the living room, and I read her words with a strange sense of detachment. It was like watching a cornered animal, lashing out with blind fury. I didn't respond. My silence was now my most powerful weapon. Every unanswered message, every ignored call was a turn of the screw. Then came the flying monkeys. The first was a call from Sarah, Marcus's wife. Her voice was a symphony of feigned concern and thinly veiled accusation. "Owen, honey, Claire is beside herself. She says you've taken the children. Please, whatever is going on, just bring them home. You're scaring everyone. I appreciate your concern, Sarah, I said, my voice calm and even. But the children are safe with me, and we won't be coming home. You should ask Claire why that is. I hung up before she could respond. The main event, of course, was my brother. David didn't bother with a phone call. He appeared at my apartment door around 7 o'clock that evening, his face flushed with rage. He must have gotten my new address from one of Claire's well-connected friends. He didn't knock. He pounded on the door with his fist, his shouts muffled by the wood. Owen, open this door right now. I swear to God, if you've hurt those kids. I had already put Leo and Maya to bed in their new room, promising them a movie night. They were exhausted from the day's excitement, and thankfully, they were sound asleep. I took a deep breath, walked to the door, and opened it. David stormed in, his eyes wild. What the hell do you think you're doing? He yelled, jabbing a finger at my chest. Claire is a wreck. You've gone off the deep end, man. Kidnapping your own children. You need to be in a hospital. I didn't say a word. I didn't try to defend myself. I just stepped back, closed the door behind him, and pointed to the large television in the living room. I had it all queued up. With the remote, I hit play. The first video was the one I took inside the soundproofed room. I watched David's face as the camera panned across the acoustic foam, the directional speaker, the laptop with the folder labeled Project Owen. His angry, self-righteous expression began to falter, replaced by a flicker of confusion. What is that? He stammered. I didn't answer. I just hit next, on the remote. The second video came on. It was the footage from the kitchen camera. The audio was crisp and clear. Claire's voice filled the silent apartment. Once he's committed, getting the doctors to sign off on the competency evaluation will be a formality. The trust is the only way to secure the kids' future, and ours. Once I have control, we can finally stop hiding. I watched my brother. The color drained from his face. He sank onto the arm of the sofa as if his legs could no longer support him. His rage evaporated, replaced by a look of sickening realization. He understood. He finally understood the depth of the deception, and his own role as an unwitting pawn in it. He had been her messenger, her tool for reinforcing the narrative. He had helped her try to destroy me. When the video ended, the silence in the room was absolute. David just stared at the blank screen, his mouth slightly agape. He looked small, broken. She was talking to her lover, I said, my voice devoid of emotion. They were planning a life together with my father's money, a life that required me to be locked away, declared legally insane. I walked over to the coffee table and picked up a file folder. I tossed it into his lap. That's a copy of the emergency custody order, and that, I said, pointing to another document, is a copy of the civil fraud lawsuit my lawyer filed against her this afternoon. And this, I added, sliding a single sheet of paper onto the top of the pile, is a copy of the receipt for the $10,000 sound system she used to make me think I was crazy. David finally looked at me, his eyes swimming with a shame so profound it was painful to watch. Owen, he whispered, his voice choked. Oh God, Owen, I had no idea. I'm so sorry. I believed her. I know, I said, and for the first time a wave of pity washed over me. He was a victim too, in his own way. She's very convincing. He buried his face in his hands, his shoulders shaking. What did I do? He muttered into his palms. I helped her. I told you she was right. I told you to get help. I let him sit there in his guilt for a long moment. Then I walked over and put a hand on his shoulder. You didn't know, David. Now you do. The question is, what are you going to do now? He looked up, his face streaked with tears. Whatever you need, he said, his voice raw with conviction. Anything. I'll testify. I'll tell them everything she said to me. I'll help you burn her to the ground. The power shift was complete. My own brother, her most powerful and trusted ally, had just become my star witness. The web of lies Claire had so carefully woven was not just unraveling, it was tightening around her own neck. The final confrontation wasn't a shouting match in a living room. It was a cold, quiet execution, carried out by the unflinching machinery of the law. 2 days after my exodus, a process server knocked on the door of the house I once called home. He served Claire with a thick manila envelope. Inside was the summons for the divorce proceedings, a notice of the fraud lawsuit, a temporary restraining order that barred her from contacting me or the children, and a motion to compel, forcing her to surrender the key to the basement storage room for legal inspection. The evidence was absolute, irrefutable, and overwhelming. The video from inside the room, the camera footage of her confession on the phone, the financial records showing the $10,000 payment, a sworn affidavit from my brother David, detailing every conversation in which Claire had lied to him and manipulated him to reinforce her narrative of my mental decline. Her counter-manipulation was desperate and pathetic. She hired a lawyer who tried to claim the soundproofing was for a potential podcasting hobby. My lawyer laughed in his face. He tried to claim the camera footage was illegally obtained, a violation of her privacy. Ms. Davies countered that in a shared marital home, where there was evidence of a crime being committed against another resident, the expectation of privacy was moot, a debatable point of law perhaps, but one the judge was clearly leaning toward in our favor given the circumstances. He tried to paint me as an unstable man who had kidnapped his children. Miss Davies simply presented the court order, signed by that very same judge, as a rebuttal. Claire was trapped. Every lie she told was immediately disproven by a piece of hard evidence. Her friends, Marcus and Sarah, who had been her willing accomplices, were subpoenaed for depositions. Faced with the threat of perjury, their loyalty to Claire evaporated. They admitted she had told them to cancel the dinner party and lie to me about it. They admitted she had coached them on what to say to reinforce my confusion. One by one, the pillars of her support system crumbled into dust. The legal battle was surprisingly short. Faced with a mountain of evidence and the prospect of a criminal investigation for fraud, Claire's lawyer advised her to surrender. She had no choice but to agree to all of our terms. I was granted sole legal and physical custody of Leo and Maya. She was given supervised visitation twice a month at a neutral third-party facility. She was stripped of any claim to my father's trust. The house, which my father's money had been the down payment for and which was legally in my name, was to be sold. As it was a primary asset belonging to me before the fraud, she had no claim to the proceeds. She walked away with half of what was left in the joint checking account, a few $1,000s, and her own personal belongings. The new reality was stark. The woman who had schemed to take millions from me was left with next to nothing. The friends who had once orbited her now shunned her, embarrassed to have been party to her cruelty. The man she had been having an affair with, a married co-worker from her old marketing firm as it turned out, disappeared the moment the lawsuit was filed, terrified of being dragged into the mess. The last I heard, she was living in a small rundown apartment on the other side of the state, working a low-wage job. The grand life she had planned, the house on the coast built on my ruin, had vanished like a mirage. She hadn't just lost the money or the house. She had lost her children. She had lost her reputation. She had lost the war she had so arrogantly started. She had tried to make me a ghost, and in the end she had become one herself. It wasn't about the vindication, but it was deeply, deeply satisfying. It's been 8 months now since that day I walked out of my old life and into a new one. The house has been sold. The legal battles are over. The dust has settled and what's left is a quiet I never knew was possible. It's not the manufactured, weaponized silence of that soundproofed room. It's a genuine, peaceful silence, filled only with the sounds of my children's laughter and the steady rhythm of our new, simpler life. Leo, my son, asked me a few months ago why we had to move, why Mommy didn't live with us anymore. It was a conversation I had been dreading, but one I knew I had to have. I didn't tell him the whole ugly truth. He's too young for that, but I told him a version of it that he could understand. I told him that sometimes grown-ups forget how to be kind to each other. I told him that his mother was sick, not in her body but in her heart, and that she needed to get better on her own for a while. I told him that my only job was to keep him and his sister safe and happy, and that our new apartment was the safest, happiest place we could be. He seemed to accept that. Kids are more resilient than we give them credit for. They just need to feel secure, and for the first time in a long time they are. My brother David and I are slowly rebuilding our relationship. The guilt he carries is heavy,
but he's trying to make amends. He comes over every Sunday for dinner. We don't cook anything fancy, usually just frozen pizza or tacos. It's not about the food, it's about showing up. He's a constant, steady presence in the kids' lives, an uncle who is there, no matter what. He's learning to forgive himself, and I'm learning to forgive him too. He was a victim of her manipulation, just as I was. I'm a full-time dad now. I manage my father's trust, not as a windfall to be spent, but as a tool to build a future for my children. I help them with their homework. I take them to the park. I read them stories at night. My life has become smaller, but infinitely more meaningful. The grand ambitions I once had have been replaced by the simple, profound joy of making my kids smile. For a long time I was angry. The rage was a fire that kept me warm during the fight. But now, the anger has mostly faded, replaced by a kind of sad wisdom. The woman I married, or the woman I thought I married, never really existed. She was a character, a role she played, and when the role no longer served her, she decided to write me out of the show. The greatest tragedy is that in trying to destroy me, she destroyed the one thing that was ever truly real in her life, the love of her children. I'm telling you all of this for a reason. If you are in a situation where your reality is constantly being questioned, where your memory is being edited by someone else, where you feel a pervasive sense of confusion and self-doubt that you can't explain, please trust your gut. That feeling is your mind's alarm system. It's telling you that something is wrong. Gaslighting isn't just a disagreement, it's a form of psychological warfare. It's a slow-motion demolition of the self. The goal isn't just to control you, it's to make you believe you deserve to be controlled. My sanity was never the issue. My silence was. I stayed quiet for too long, accepting a narrative that wasn't my own because it was easier than confronting the terrifying alternative. The moment I found that receipt, the moment I chose to believe my own perception over her deception, was the moment I started to get free. You don't have to find a receipt in a toolbox. Your proof might be a pattern of lies, a series of coincidences that don't add up, or just that unshakable feeling in your soul that something is deeply fundamentally wrong. Trust that feeling. It's the most honest voice you've got. I'd be interested to hear if any of you have gone through something similar. What was the moment you knew you had to trust yourself over someone else's version of reality? Let me know your story in the comments below. And if this story resonated with you, if it made you feel seen or validated, please give it a like and subscribe for more content. Thank you for listening.